Talipo, retold by S. E. Schlosser. Way back in the woods of Tennessee lived an old man and his 3 dogs, Uno, Eno, and Cumtico Calico. They lived in a small cabin with only one room. This room was their parlor, and their bedroom, and their kitchen, and their sitting room. It had one giant fireplace where the old man cooked supper for himself and his dogs every night. One night, while the dogs were snoozing by the fire and the old man was washing up after his supper, a very curious creature crept through a crack between the logs of the cabin. The old man stopped washing his plate and stared at the creature. It had a rather round body and the longest tail you ever did see. As soon as the old man saw that varmint invading his cozy cabin, he grabbed up his hatchet. Thwack! He cut off its tail. The creature gave a startled squeak and raced back through the crack in the logs. Beside the fire, the dogs grumbled a bit and rolled over, ignoring the whole thing. The old man picked up the very long tail. There was some good meat on that tail, so he roasted it over the fire. Cumtico Calico woke up when she smelled the tail cooking. She begged for a bite, but after the old man had his first taste, he couldn't bear to part with a single mouthful. Cumtico Calico grumbled and lay back down to sleep. The old man was tired, so he finished washing up and went back to bed. He hadn't been sleeping too long when a thumping noise awoke him. It sounded like an animal was climbing up the side of his cabin. He heard a scratch, scratch, scratching noise like the claws of a cat, and then a voice rang out. "Talipo, Talipo, all I want's my Talipo." The old man sat bolt upright in bed. He called to the dogs, "Hut, hut, hut," like he did when they were out hunting. Uno and Eno jumped up immediately and began barking like mad. Cumtico Calico got up slowly and stretched. She was still mad at the old man for not giving her a bite at the tail. The old man sent the dogs outside. He heard them trying to climb the cabin walls after the creature. He gave a squeal, and he heard a thump as it jumped to the ground and raced away, the dogs chasing it around the back of the cabin and deep into the woods. Much later, he heard the dogs return and lay down under the lean-to attached to the cabin. The old man relaxed then and went back to sleep. Along about midnight, the old man woke with his heart pounding madly. He could hear something scratch, scratch, scratching right above his cabin door. "Talipo, Talipo, all I want's my Talipo." The voice was chanting rhythmically against the steady scratch, scratch, scratch at the top of the door. The old man jumped up, yelling, "Hut, hut, hut," to his dogs. They started barking wildly, and he heard them race around the corner of the house from the lean-to. He saw them catch up with a shadowy something at the gate in front of the cabin. The dogs almost tore the fence down trying to get at it. Finally, Cumtico Calico leapt onto a stump and over the fence, Uno and Eno on her heels, and he heard them chasing the creature way down into the big swamp. The old man sat up for a while, listening for the dogs to return. About 3 a.m, he finally fell asleep again. Toward daybreak, but while it was still dark, the old man was wakened again by the sound of a voice coming from the direction of the swamp. "You know, I know, all I want's my Talipo." The old man broke out in a cold sweat and yelled, "Hut, hut, hut," for his dogs. But the dogs didn't answer, and the old man feared that the creature had lured them down into the big swamp to kill them. He got out of bed and barricaded the door. Then he hid under the covers and tried to sleep. When it was light, he was going to take his hatchet and his gun and go find his dogs. Just before morning, the old man was wakened from a fitful doze by a thumping sound right in the cabin. Something was climbing the covers at the foot of his bed. He peered over the covers and saw 2 pointed ears at the end of the bed. He could hear a scratch, scratch, scratching sound as the creature climbed up the bed, and in a moment he was looking into 2 big, round, fiery eyes. The old man wanted to shout for the dogs, but he couldn't make his voice work. He just shivered as the creature crept up the bed toward him. It was large and heavy. He could feel its sharp claws pricking him as it walked up his body. When it reached his face, it bent toward him and said in a low voice, "Talipo."
Turnabout is fair play. by S.E. Schlosser. Old Uncle Phil was a tall scarecrow of a fellow who was jumpier than a grasshopper. He lived and worked on a small farm near Branchville, and he believed that the hostile world was largely populated with monsters and ghosts and witches and werewolves. Uncle Phil believed in just about every sort of scary critter that you can imagine. He shied away from shadows. He jumped whenever anyone spoke to him, and he lived in perpetual fear that someone, somewhere, was out to get him. Uncle Phil wore so many amulets and charms that he chimed and he rattled and he clanked whenever he moved. Early in life, he took a trip to Pennsylvania Dutch country to learn what the most powerful hex signs were so he could paint them on his house and barn. Uncle Phil hated to go outside after dark. He always carried a lantern with him so as not to be caught anywhere without light. Uncle Phil even took the long way home rather than walk through the ominous woods surrounding the river. Uncle Phil became so paranoid that he refused to shake hands with anybody because it might allow an evil spirit to enter him. And Uncle Phil never entered a house which had a cat because he thought that the animal might be an imp or some witch's familiar. Then a new family moved to town with 2 sons who were very naughty indeed. As soon as they learned about the jumpy Uncle Phil, those boys became obsessed with tormenting him. They snuck out to Uncle Phil's place one night and painted all over his hex signs. When Uncle Phil woke up the next morning, the barn and the house were completely bare. Uncle Phil ran all the way to town on foot because he was sure that the devil had removed the hex signs in order to steal his soul away while he slept. Uncle Phil crouched in a pew in the local church and wouldn't leave until the minister had prayed over his house and the neighborhood painter had recreated the hex signs. A week after this event, the boys gathered all of the black cats in town and put them into Uncle Phil's house while he was away. When Uncle Phil opened the door, his dog rushed into the front room and fur started flying everywhere as the black cats hissed and scratched and yowled and bit. Back Uncle Phil ran to the church, and back came the minister with some helpers to clear the house of black cats and bless it against any evil witches who wanted to curse Uncle Phil. The boys were forced to lay low for a while after this incident, which had upset all the adults in town. The school children were subjected to a lecture on cruelty and were instructed to report any mischief being committed against Uncle Phil. Of course, all the children knew who the culprits really were, but no one told. For a month, Uncle Phil was left in peace. No fruit disappeared from his orchards, no mysterious ghost tapped his shoulder, no goblins tossed rocks at him from the trees. Then, the boys came up with another plan. One night, they snuck in through Uncle Phil's parlor window, dragging a scarecrow inside with them. They set up the scarecrow so that it loomed over the poor sleeping man, with one arm out thrust, as if it wanted to shake hands with him. Then they positioned a lantern on a tree branch just outside the second-story room so that the light illuminated the grotesque face of the scarecrow. Once everything was in place, the boys started moaning and groaning and calling Uncle Phil's name from the yard outside his bedroom window. Uncle Phil woke with a gasp and screamed in sheer terror when his eyes encountered the scarecrow. Leaping off the bed, he dove out of his bedroom window and climbed to the very top of the tree. From his high perch, Uncle Phil clutched desperately at the various charms he wore under his nightshirt and said the 23rd Psalm out loud. Below him, the lantern rocked dangerously and then fell to the ground beneath a tree, setting fire to the woodpile beside the house. The boys stopped laughing when they realized that Uncle Phil's house was on fire. They ran to the barn and wet some old sacks in the water barrel. Together they managed to put out the fire, but not before the whole side of the house was scorched with flames. In the tree above them, they could hear Uncle Phil begging God to